Professors, who was the dumbest student you ever had, and what was so dumb about them? Story 1. I'm not a professor, but a fellow student I was paired with on fourth-year pharmacy school rotations was abysmally stupid. Our student room that 6 of us would do our assignments and projects in at the hospital was filled with a combination of meme posters created for our preceptor and motivational posters. Well, one poster was of whales breaching the ocean. Well, this one guy, we'll call him M, blurts out one quiet afternoon, "That poster is so freaking stupid. Why are whales at the top of the water? They don't breathe air." Being bored myself, I indulged him and asked what he meant, to which he responded that whales were fish, and thus don't breathe air, they breathe water. This piqued everyone else's interest now, and we tell him that whales are mammals just like dolphins are. He disagrees, saying that anything that swims in the water is a fish. Being the smart butt that I can be sometimes, I ask him what a penguin is then. He tells us that penguins are just so stupid because they don't realize that they can fly, and that all birds fly. I bring up ostriches as an example of a bird that doesn't fly, and he replies that those are just bird-like mammals. What are bats then? He replies that they are clearly birds. This goes round and round for about 15 minutes until another fellow pharmacy student asks him how he passed basic biology or comparative anatomy, both requirements for pharmacy school. He informs us that we are the idiots for actually taking the class, that he took them online and he just paid his sister, who was in med school at the time, to take the assignments and exams for him. It seems like he was trolling us, right? No, this connected so many dots for us. M was known for being just genuinely unintelligent and would ask the most basic questions, like what Benadryl is used for, at the end of a lecture about allergy medication that just covered it. Our entire class of 200-ish future pharmacists were always puzzled by how he made it into our school. Story 2. I'm not the professor, but I did talk to her about this student at the time. I was taking an online class. Each week we had to answer in a discussion board, in our own words, about whatever the topic was. The answers were all public to inspire discussion. I researched, took my time writing out the answers. Even though our names showed up, I still signed my name at the end of it. Usually an hour or two after I post my stuff, a classmate would post hers too. Without fail, she would copy and paste what I wrote and claim it as her answer too. It was clear she never bothered to read it either, because she kept my name at the end of it. After seeing this happen over 2 weeks, I emailed our professor and voiced my complaint. She emailed me back and said it's already been noticed by her. The following week, that classmate was no longer on the class roster. I was always curious who would pay that kind of money just to steal answers and not bother to learn. She wasn't young either. We had profile pages. She was older than me by at least 20 years. Was just bizarre and dumb. Story 3. I saw some amazingly bad attempts at plagiarism in my day. These included, number 1, plagiarizing from an article in a journal the professor edited. This was a grad student. Number 2, plagiarizing from the same source as another student in the same class. First hit on Google is not your friend. Number 3, turning in a sophomore lit survey paper referring to a poet's use of hendecasyllabics. I have a doctoral degree and I had to look that one up. Googled the author's name plus hendecasyllabics, and there was the paper. Only thing the student contributed was her name. Number 4, one caught red-handed, insisting tearfully that she didn't plagiarize. Her roommate wrote the paper for her, and her roommate was the dirty plagiarist. I was literally speechless for a moment while I grappled with this line of reasoning. Bonus points, this was Ms. Hendecasyllabics. Story 4. As a GA teaching freshman English, I had a couple instances of cheating that left me speechless. First, my university uses an online plagiarism checker, and the students know this. With one student, over half of his essay was copied from a website. He looked genuinely shocked when I called him out on it, and then told me that his mother wrote the paper for him. I explained that his mother writing his paper was also cheating. Then he asked if he could get credit for the half that wasn't from a website. Another time, the students had to analyze a movie showing how it used the hero's journey as plot structure. This was an easy assignment, seeing as how nearly every modern movie uses this structure. The student copied the Wikipedia summary of Aladdin word for word, and he denied doing it. He argued it was a coincidence that his entire essay was the exact same as Wikipedia's. Story 5. I don't know if this qualifies as dumb or is closer to stupid, but I had a student who didn't show up for class regularly, and her grade was going to be a C, maybe a D, depending on her final exam. What made her dumb, however, was how she tried to cheat on the final exam. She reached down into her bag and took out her phone, put it on the desk, typed something into it, looked at the test, looked at her phone, looked back at her test, rechecked her phone, then answered whatever question she was looking up. Just to make sure, I let her do it one more time. I was watching her the whole time, and she was completely oblivious to it. She got an F. Story 6. I didn't have any particularly dumb students, also not a professor, but a graduate teaching assistant, but I did mark one essay that began so eloquently with, "Do we born intelligent?" Edit. As an addendum, because I still find this story hilarious, the second sentence was, "How is our cognitive development?" One of my fellow PhD students marked an essay once, which came in at 2 pages, it was a 6-page limit, and half of the essay, so 1 page, discussed Mowgli from the Disney animated version of The Jungle Book. The topic was developmental psychology. Story 7. History professor is talking about some expedition or something, and mentions Antarctica, standing in front of a world map. Girl raises her hand, asks, "Excuse me, but where is Antarctica?" Professor stands there, unable to answer for a few seconds, then raises his arm to the map and goes, "Right here," while running his hand under Antarctica and making exaggerated Vanna White motions. Girl goes, "Oh, okay." I was a little scared. More for the professor. He had that "I am severely underpaid" expression. Story 8. Actually, one of the smarter kids in my class. Ethics. Awareness of social norms, not so much. He sent me an email after the semester ended, asking if I'd mind telling my next semester class that his digital textbook was available for sale. Oh, and that it's a PDF, so if multiple people want it, he can sell them all copies. I responded that I admire his entrepreneurial spirit, but it probably wasn't a good idea to solicit his professor's help in starting a piracy-based bookselling business. Story 9. I was a student in this class, but after an entire chapter of going over the Civil War in a history class, our teacher, as a joke, said, "So, who won the Civil War?" A girl raised her hand and said, "The South," and he laughed until he realized she was serious, and she tried to defend it, saying, "What, we still have slaves, right?" Edit. She was referring to still having mass slavery in the South. Story 10. A student in my economics class started his final essay with this: "We are all familiar with the country Africa, yet at the same time we know little about them. All we know is that it is hot there. African Americans live there, and they are really poor. This begs the question, why is Africa that poor?" It was just so jam-packed with stupids, I had to stop grading for 24 hours. Edit. For the record, this was indeed a college student. Story 8. All she had to do to graduate was to show up to a semester. I pointed out the importance of this, as it was the last time this mandatory thing was being run, and the last chance for her, having missed earlier opportunities, and I wouldn't run the class next year. Got an email saying she had a dentist appointment, and missed it. She failed, couldn't get her degree, and had to come back 18 months later for it. Story 12. I teach a class on the history of psychology. When covering the chapter on behaviorism and discussing the ideas of its founder, John Watson, who was a determinist, did not believe in free will, a student asked me in the middle of class that if he was a determinist, why did he advocate free will in the Sherlock Holmes book? I was really taken aback by that one. Story 13. I had a student who tried to argue that plagiarism wasn't real after ganking the text of a 1-page paper on velociraptors straight from a top Google search result for them. But if you read something, then you're just taking the knowledge and thumping it back into a word processor. What's the difference? She was a criminal justice major. Story 14. Not a professor, but back when I was in high school, I was a library aide, and I was walking into the classrooms distributing some books, and I walked into a class with the professor in the middle of an angry lecture on plagiarism because one of the students turned in an essay that started with, "In my 25-plus years of experience in this field." Story 15. One of my husband's colleagues said a kid came up to him after an exam and said, "I didn't know the answers to the questions you asked on the test, so I made up my own questions and answered them." The professor said, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, and when I go to lunch, I'm going to tell all my friends." Story 16. One of my students told me that he was going to be 21 when he graduated high school. I asked him why. He explained that he ages 2 years every year. He is 15, turning 16, so that is 2 years. He's probably right that he will not graduate high school till age 21, but not for the reason he mentioned. Story 17. I had a student plagiarize on the final exam. It was a take-home essay/short answer exam. They knew to cite any sources, and to put it in their own words. The kicker? This particularly bright bulb plagiarized me, the professor. She tried to pass off my words as her own. Ahoy. Story 18. May or may not be dumb, but my friend and I went to her uncle's house, which had this piece of paper framed and put on the wall. It was a 0 out of 20 on a true or false quiz. Her uncle was a professor and was just too impressed by such an achievement that he had to put it in his home. Story 19. I didn't believe any student was dumb. He or she may only have needed the right motivation. Until I met RJ. RJ was dumb. RJ didn't realize that the chicken we ate was the same as the animal. RJ was 21 at the time. Story 20. Happened in the first week of a college anthropology course. Professor, let's list a few basic differences between modern humans and animals. Student, we have a heartbeat. Story 21. I had a student who wrote an art history paper about Leonard da Vinci. Didn't even run that sucker through a spell check or anything. Referred to him as that throughout the entire paper. Story 22. I am not a professor, but I watched one facepalm after my classmate said this. I don't even know what a verb is. This was in an advanced linguistics course for would-be English teachers. Story 23. I once had a girl in my class ask why meteors always fall into craters. For context, this was a journalism degree, and we were talking about libel laws. This girl did not pass. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.